Funky politics.
Funky politics. Funky politics.
Funky politics. Funky politics.
Funky politics.
And welcome to Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. My name is Lee Eric Smith, joined in the studio by Doc Ward and the Rainmaker, Tasha Downey.
Rainmaker.
The Rainmaker.
That sound real stripified, huh?
Look, I wasn't going.
Y'all don't want to see my twerking action. I'm thinking Rainmaker.
I was not going to say it. But when I saw it on the script, I said, Raymond, who put that down there?
I'm just reading what's on the script.
Is that what they call you?
Make it.
Is that what they call you? Well, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something interesting. Since you brought that up.
Since you
brought that up. I understand in Jackson, Mississippi, a black African-American adult entertainer.
She was black and African-American?
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah. Ooh,
go on.
An African-American adult entertainer has been awarded $3.3 million in court for racial discrimination in her chosen profession. It appears that she was working at one club, and because she worked at this club being African-American, she had to work at the other club. Well, we just say it was Danny's Downtown in Jackson, Mississippi. They made her work at another club in addition to working in Jackson, and one in Jackson, and the other club was dirty, seedy. They let the patrons grope and everywhere else. But in this club, there was no groping. She was subject to those horrible conditions for a number of years, her and other African-American adult entertainment dancers. And now a judge has said because of that discrimination, she should be awarded $3.3 million.
That's a lot of money.
That's making it right.
It goes to you. That's making it. That's a thunderstorm.
And I tell you what,
that's a monsoon. That's a typhoon.
That is so funky.
Typhoonery, pure typhoonery.
That is so funky.
So funky.
I'm not even going to try to segue.
You can't mess with
into who our guest is going to be today.
But you know what? Look, I understand.
But it all comes together, though.
And I understand it's dancing, but to me, it's the empowerment of women.
It is.
A woman standing up and saying, no matter what I do, you got to treat me right.
It is a version
So
of
you got to
sex
treat
work.
me right.
Sex work is work.
Oh, we gonna make it right. Thank you. Say it again.
It is sex work, and sex work is work.
All right.
So on the Funky Politics today,
can you segue for that? Does that enough segue for you, bro?
So today on the Funky Politics, our in-studio guest is going to be Cherisse Scott. She's the founder of Sister Reach. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things having to do with reproductive justice and including all of the hot topics of what's going on in Alabama relative to that almost complete abortion ban law they passed.
Heinous.
She's got thoughts on it, y'all.
She's got thoughts on it. She's got thoughts on it. Thoughts are empowered too.
And thoughts.
All of that and more when we come back from this break on Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. Don't go away.
Funky politics.
3.
Am I gonna sit there and argue with you over we had steak 2 days ago, I want chicken?
B.
I'm gonna be spicy all the time. I don't care if I'm single or not.
C.
I think that the foundation is how you were brought up.
3 black chicks on the Kudzukian Network.
Kudzukian. Funky politics.
It's all the way live. It's all the way live. It's all the way live.
And as promised, we're back here on Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. Lee Eric Smith alongside Tasha Downey and Doc Ward. Our special in-studio guest today is none other than Miss Cherisse Scott, who is the founder of Sister Reach Incorporated. Thanks for joining us in studio today. We're so happy you're here.
I'm so glad to be here.
Start us off by telling our listeners a little bit about your background, about how you came to be involved in this work around advocacy and women's rights.
Absolutely. So Sister Reach is the first reproductive justice organization founded in the state of Tennessee. And I came to this work as a woman who was in need of a safe and legal abortion when I was living in Chicago. And so I was in need of an abortion. I looked in the yellow pages. I saw an ad. It said, need an abortion, call us. I made an appointment. I went there. When I got there, it was not an actual clinic, or it didn't look like a clinic. I was met by a white woman who sat me in a room and asked me different want information about myself. Was I on food stamps? Did I have a job? These types of things. I mean, which at that time wasn't the situation. I actually was working full time and had actually just come off tour, doing my thing.
Nothing
everything.
to do with
Nothing
what you were
to do
there
with what
for.
I was there for,
Nothing
right?
to do with that.
And so I did my thing. I talked to the folks for about 2.5 hours. They sat me in front of this television. I watched anime after procedure after anime after procedure of babies' heads being crushed and taken out of, vacuum aspiration procedures. It was scare tactics.
You're
is
there
what it was.
to get an abortion.
I went to get an abortion.
And you're watching cartoons.
I was watching cartoons about
graphic
abortion.
cartoons about
absolutely
about someone's perception of abortion.
Someone's perception of abortion,
Right,
absolutely.
right.
And so I had never had a procedure before. I didn't have any type of back knowledge of what that looked like. I think once the white woman realized that she wasn't able to kind of change my mind, she sent a black woman in to talk to me.
Oh,
and
yeah, because she's gonna make it work.
She's gonna be the one.
She's gonna be the one. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
and so, she had a conversation with me about, her husband and when they were in college, and she got pregnant, and she thought that they needed to keep the baby, and if I just hung on in there, everything would work out. And I was just like, look, sis. My baby's father just said that he doesn't want this baby.
Were you married at the time?
I was not married. I had a boyfriend.
Right.
That was it. Got pregnant. Both of us were up and coming artists trying to do our thing and everything. But the bottom line is that he said he didn't want the pregnancy. And that also being said, the relationship was really in a bad space.
Right.
And so for me,
and he was not there with you at the time.
No, not at all. Mm-hmm. And growing up in a household where my mother and father divorced in the early 80s, and we went for a really long stint of it just being a single mother situation until she remarried in my teens. The bottom line is that we struggled, right? We didn't just struggle. What it really looks like for children to grow up without both parents, what it really means for young people to grow up in a household where, a mother has or a parent has 2 and 3, 4 jobs and not really able to fully function in the ways that they may want to matters. And I just did not want that to be a scenario that I would bring a child into the world to have. Right. And I also just didn't want a situation where, if a brother said he doesn't want the baby, for me, that sounded like he wasn't going to be there for the baby. Otherwise, I would have had the baby. I didn't have any children. Choice. I was making a choice
about what to do with your body.
Absolutely.
At a critical time in
my life. Yeah. Right.
You're listening to The Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. Yeah. So take us from that to the launch of Sister Reach.
So at a party, I met a sister and I overheard what she was doing. She was talking about this thing called reproductive justice that she did, and sex education and helping women understand their bodies and things like that. I stayed in touch with her. The opportunity came for me to volunteer, and then there was an opportunity to be on the board, and then I was able to work for her. And so for the next 3 years, I worked for her, right? I ended up having to move back to Memphis after my mother was ill, and I moved back here. But when I got to Memphis, there wasn't anything like the work I was doing in Chicago. And my mom was like, you should do something. And so, I wrote a business plan with the help of my mother and my grandmother, and came up with this, organization called Sister Reach, knowing that I wanted to help women and girls to navigate situations not like I had to navigate, making sure that they knew about their bodies and everything that I had learned. I wanted to make sure that I brought that here to Memphis, knowing that Memphis had high rates of, teen pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections and those types of things, poverty, crime, folks living in food deserts and stuff like that. And so I did that work, and we opened in 2011. And so we are the first reproductive justice organization in the state of Tennessee. And this October, we will be 8 years old. And so I'm very proud to say that we don't only work in Memphis, we work across the state, we work in the region, we work on the local, state, the national level, and also sometimes we get to do some international work. This year we get to go out of the country a few times, so it's going to be really great doing the work.
That's heavy.
That's
Cherisse,
awesome.
You mentioned reproductive justice.
Absolutely.
Talk about what that is and what it looks like here in the great state of Tennessee, one of the most conservative states in the United States.
Yeah, so reproductive justice is a framework that was coined by Black women in Chicago in 1994. The framework is 25 years old today, and it's based on principles that basically state that people have the right to have a baby, not have a baby, parent their children that they have in safe environments. They need to also be able to have the human right to be free from reproductive oppression and have the right to express their sexuality sexuality and spirituality without violence and shame. And then the best one that I love is that they deserve a quality of life that is sustainable before, beyond, and beyond the ability to give birth or to parent. And so the quality of life piece is the piece for me that is kind of that core. What does it really look like for young people to become pregnant? What is it, and not just the girl, but what does it look like to be the father of a child, and you're a child, right? What does it look like for LGBT folks, some who can become pregnant, trans men, for example? We need to make sure that folks have education all the way across the board. This is Memphis. Memphis has some of the highest rates of infant mortality and maternal morbidity in the country. Memphis has some of the highest rates of gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis,
and
HIV.
has for years.
Y'all know we love the Lord here.
Right.
We love Jesus.
And Memphis has a church on every corner.
Loving the Lord has nothing
we don't have
to do.
Sex. We love
Loving
Jesus.
the Lord has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
But it really does.
But it does.
No,
You love
anyway.
Jesus. You can don't be having sex.
You can be
ain't married.
Look, you can be on fire for God, and I'm gonna shut up.
But it's better to marry than burn with lust. So what makes this work so unique?
Burn with lust.
I think that it's unique because it's based in a human rights framework. It's not just about abortion, right? And I think that Black women who made sure, and the sister who I met in Chicago was one of the founding mothers, made sure that there was the full gamut of the human rights framework was supposed to be what a woman or a person was supposed to be able to access. And if any portion of human rights is not in place, then that means that they're not fully realizing or being able to operate within a sphere of human rights, which is not only just, what we are supposed to be given as Americans, but I believe that as a woman of faith, that's our sacred right, that we are born into.
But slow down. It's just too that you.
That's a lot. Okay,
it says a woman of faith.
Yeah, you got to slow that in the groove because that's very funky what you just said. Because you were saying you're basing it on a human rights model.
Yeah, it's a human rights framework.
The human rights framework.
And it's rooted.
And if the human rights framework is out of kilter
at all, on any level,
not just reproductive health, but on any level of oppression, then everything else that follows, is jacked up.
If I don't have the right to vote, then I don't have the control around even what we're dealing with right now with the abortion bans and things like that. If I don't have cultural rights, my religious rights, right? So like everybody's not Christian, but right now we're dealing with white supremacy meets Christianity meets white nationalism, right? And basically this kind of transformation and control that everybody's believing the same way or are supposed to live under these particular set of rules based on folks who aren't necessarily doing that from a space of faith, but they're doing that from a space of power, control, and privilege. And so that for us is something that we're trying to like tease out and really show those nuances because it's really not about babies. Because if it was about babies, then pro-lifers would be on the front line with folks who are dying at the hands of janky law enforcement. If it was really about babies, then they should have been on the border making sure the babies weren't in cages. If it was really about
or dying at the border, like
absolutely
what's happening.
Absolutely.
You're listening to the Funky Politics powered by the Kudzukian Network. That brings me into this part of the conversation because I always thought it was kind of a false, a false opposition thing. We say pro-life and anti-abortion, but in my head, if you're the opposite of anti-abortion is pro-abortion. Or if you're pro-life, the opposite of pro-life is anti-life, right? But nobody's coming out saying that. And so I was just kind of wondering, there are nuances in there. And I was wondering how you because I believe that it is possible and a lot of people, maybe even most people, can hold both of those in the same place. You can be, quote, anti-abortion and pro-life for yourself and pro-life at the same time.
Absolutely.
But that position doesn't seem to get a whole lot of attention in our current discourse.
And that's intentional. I think that the way that, politicians, conservative politicians who are trying to frame this argument are trying to say that, hey, folks like me, not only are we irresponsible, we don't love God, we don't love our children.
And you're socialist.
Right. And we're when that's not the case at all. I think that at the very core, folks understand that people need access to education. And that's one of the things that Sister Reach does. It's centered. that is the center, the bedrock of our work is centered in education, making sure, because basically that's what changed the game for me, right? Though, I ended up having that baby. When I went to the crisis pregnancy center is what they're called. They convinced me, they told me basically that if I had an abortion, my uterus would be perforated and I wouldn't be able to have any children. Well, I hadn't had any children yet. So that in and of itself made me make the decision to go ahead and move forth with the pregnancy, right? But then after that, there was no follow-up. And I think what's also important to lift up in this conversation is that these pro-birth, anti-choice supremacists, aren't in any other point of the life.
Wait, that was way funky. Slow that one down. Say that one again. Pro-birth.
Anti-choice.
Anti-choice. Okay. Go on.
That, that they are...
Wait, supremacists. Okay, I just had to get that one in there.
Supremacists.
So,
oppressionists.
Okay.
Oppressionists. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's what they, they are making sure that they continue to keep the power and the control. And we've seen, their whole objective is to stop women from, it's just to control people's ability to have babies or not to have babies, right? They're not even interested in making sure that men are educated. They're not about their bodies, about how they use their penises, right? Around dating violence, around sexual assault, none of those things. And we're seeing, in the news that there are politicians who are Republican who have paid for their mistress to have an abortion, right? They're raping children
in another state.
In another state
where they're.
Well, that's not to say that we don't
we got
know
a state where we had to remove a whole legislator.
Remove a what?
A whole legislator.
I didn't know what you were about to say.
And we got one that they did bring up on the same accusations that he did have a mistress and his mistress, he paid for abortions. It's a whole
legislator. Okay, I didn't know what you said.
Not half of him, all of him.
Okay, I didn't know. I had to get
all of him.
Enunciation.
So we done put put a couple of them out the great state of Tennessee.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's be real. Knoxville has a lot of incest going on in the East Tennessee area, right? So this isn't something that's far-fetched. We've been dealing with sexual assault and rape.
Wait, is that reported? Because that's a heavy
I wouldn't
statement.
say that it's being reported as much as it's supposed to be reported.
That's a heavy statement when you say that like a county has incest.
Well, I mean,
because that's not actually legal.
Well, it's not legal, but it's happening.
Wow. Well, hold it right there because we do have to cut to a break, and it's a whole lot of funky stuff going on in America. And we deliberately spent this first segment kind of setting the stage because what's happening in America right now, we're seeing the passing of various laws that are infringing upon reproductive rights, and we're going to dig into that when we come back from this break with Cherisse Scott, founder of Sister Reach Incorporated. You're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. Don't go away.
We got the funk. Funky Politics on the Kudzukian Network.
R&R on Sports is proud to be on Sirius XM.
So what's R&R stand for?
Real talk and relevant sports issues.
It's racial and relative. We're brothers from the South. We can relate.
R&R has meaningful multiplicity.
Listen to you all polysyllabic and alliterative.
R&R is Larry Robinson and Howard Robertson conversing,
challenging, and always chuckling.
R&R on Sports, part of the Kudzukian Network.
Hey, this is Cherisse Scott, founder and CEO of Sister Reach, and you're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network.
Hey yo, Bo knows this, and Bo knows that, but Bo don't know jack, cause Bo can't rap. Well, what do you know? The D-Dog is first up to bat.
And we're back on Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. Lee Eric Smith alongside Doc Ward and the Rainmaker, Tasha Downey.
We're back with the funk.
Right.
Our whole funk.
Our special in-studio guest,
nothing but the funk,
is Cherisse Scott. She is the founder of Sister Reach Incorporated. Before we went to the break, so in the news recently, we've learned that the state of Alabama
is funkier than anywhere else in the world.
It's way too white, I think, to be funky. In this case, the Alabama State Senate.
So you're gonna make me say something derogatory.
The Alabama State Senate.
Yeah.
An all-white male majority,
27
voted to virtually ban all abortions in the state of Alabama.
Right.
Now, the question I wanted to ask you, Cherisse, was, I'm not even going to start with them. I'm going to ask what your thought was when you saw a woman governor, the woman governor of Alabama, sign that into law. What was your reaction to that?
I was not surprised. One, because I am very clear, even if we look at the 2016 election,
right.
That when it comes down to where white women stand on issues around abortion and sex education, by and large, especially conservative white women, they vote the same way that conservative white men vote. So I wasn't necessarily surprised. I think that I've seen far too many woman legislators or female legislators, even in our own state of Tennessee, vote against themselves and their own interests, even if it may be because they feel like they are not the folks that they are voting on, against.
Right.
But Republicans have abortions, clearly. Right. Republicans need sex education. Republicans get raped. Republicans need access to health care. Republicans don't understand their bodies and need access to sex education. So I wasn't fully surprised, but maybe just because I do this work so much, I've been doing it so long at this point that I'm no longer confused or, totally surprised when I see, conservative white women align with their own privilege, because we got to still think about it in the context of what all of this really looks like. As long as people of color can be controlled, and these are going to be the folks, and not to put all people of color in the poverty box, because I recognize that many of us are doing our thing and we have resources, we have education,
and
we got money,
poor white people,
these types of things, and poor white folks, right? But when we start thinking about what does state legislatures look like across the country, majority folks who are voting against the interests of people of color are white. And so I wasn't surprised. What I was disappointed, because I also know that she claims to be a person of faith, and she's an imposter.
Being the governor.
Yeah, she is an imposter as far as I'm concerned. I just think we need to call that out a little bit more. Folks, they're doing all of this under the guise of Jesus, weaponizing biblical scripture and using that to justify what they're doing, and their damn lie. Period.
Just preach. That's very funky.
Just preach.
Well, so the more things change, the more they stay the same.
And we also know that this is, just one battle or one battlefront in a much larger movement, so to speak. We know that there's been for a while this national movement to, the strategy has been, okay, we're going to see if we can get one of these laws passed at the state level.
Sure.
And then we'll see if we know it's going to get challenged in court.
Right.
And then we'll, walk it up the chain and hopefully get Roe versus Wade overturned at the Supreme Court. And dog, if it doesn't look like it's going to start working, maybe, we've seen President Trump, appoint these, 2 justices. He might even get another one. We've also seen other states start to, take these similar measures. So what do you see in terms of how this movement is evolving, and is it gaining momentum? And is there a way to slow it down?
Their movement?
Yeah, the movement that seems to be pushing this thing toward a Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist. I want to, be really clear that right now we have the protection of Roe v. Wade as far as the 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. However, if they were able to chip away at the 14th Amendment and put the law, or put this back in the hands of the states across the country, then, they could immediately reverse, or they could immediately move on a full abortion ban across the country. Or if they were able to overturn Roe v. Wade, they could do the same thing. So like in the state of Tennessee, we've got that trigger ban that's sitting on Governor Lee's, desk. And if we are able to, and if Roe v. Wade is overturned, or if that privacy piece is taken out where states have control again over abortion services, then they're going to fast track it being fully outlawed across the country. So, right now, places like California, Illinois, New York are safe right now. But if we lose Roe v. Wade, then, there is no protection if we don't have the type of legislative support to make sure that doesn't happen in the state and in the House. And so in the state of Tennessee, being a supermajority Republican, we would fully lose abortion services. But right now, and luckily, the 6-week abortion ban didn't necessarily make it all the way through, but still we have a problem here. And then also understand that there's kind of other things at play, right? So, all right, in the meantime, we've got abstinence-based sex education that's mandated. And basically what that means is if Sister Reach goes into Shelby County School schools and teaches anything outside of that mandate, we could be fined up to $500 a child for that. And, that could basically put organizations like a Sister Reach out of business, and other types of organizations that really rely on that.
You're listening to The Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. So, talk about sex ed, but what else? You talked about that.
Healthcare reform, the fact that in the state of Tennessee, an undocumented woman can get a long-acting reversible contraceptive method, and that's basically an IUD or a Nexplanon that goes in the arm, but she can't get prenatal care because she is undocumented. Right. So it's I think we need to also kind of think back to what was going down when Obama was in office. We were excited, and I think we got our eyes off the prize a little bit. And while we weren't watching, Republicans were winning seats on the local and state level. This is why they have as much power that they do. Folks turned out.
There are about 22 states, I think, in the union that are controlled by Republican houses, Republican senates, and Republican governors. So that leaves, you do your math, 28 other places where it's not. But those places that are controlled by Democrats in reverse, or those that would be supporters of women's reproductive health and rights, and I'm not like about 11 or 12 of those, I think.
Well, and I'm not going to fully lay it at the feet of Republicans, because remember, we had Frank DeBerry, who's a Democrat and a black man right here in the state of Tennessee, that was like, he waited 25 years to vote against abortion rights. So that's something to be said. We've got to be able to think about the ways that the folks on our side, on this progressive side, for those who claim to be progressive, what's the role, regardless of party, right? And I recognize that, folks are informed by so many things around abortion and other health services around sexual health. I just think that it is irresponsible, understanding that black women in particular have died at such an alarming rate before Roe v. Wade was put in place, and still after, like any other law, it takes a minute for that thing to filter down to the ground.
Why isn't the issue of women's reproductive health on an African-American woman's basis an agenda of the NAACP, the Urban League, the National Conference of Black? Why is it not? Why
the
is
links,
that not?
The AKAs, the Deltas, the Zetas, the Sigma Gamma Rhos.
In any of those organizations, but particularly those that find themselves interfacing with government and legislative change. That's what I'm really. Why is it not part of the? Or is it? It could be wrong, but why?
I think that it's more of an individual thing. I think because those entities are collective and folks have different politics who are a part of those types of entities. This is why, potentially that's not the case. I think also we have to on the nonprofit side, understanding how the money flows, and if you do certain things, you don't get certain money. If you don't do certain things, you get the money that you need. I think we've got to also look at the ways that money controls the way that people make decisions and show up and support folks.
That they're donors that are actually controlling the agenda of these organizations that are not supportive of the things that say Sister Reach or other similarly situated organizations.
In some situations, but not, and maybe not all, but in some situations, those conservative dollars control the game.
You're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. So, because at some point in time, this all has to reconcile itself one way or the other. I don't know, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, if it's left up to the states, each and individual state. I know you said that's the end of it all, but a Gallup poll recently said that 80% of Americans, 80%, believe that there should be some type of allowance for women to receive abortions, even if it's just in those issues of rape or incest. No one, only 18% of people seem to be in any way supportive of what happened in the travesty that happened in Alabama and what's happening across the southern
we
states.
saw black folks mobilize against Roy Moore. Black folks went to the polls in Alabama.
Yeah, and it's
it's
just sort of not even in a straight line of thinking where you're against all abortions, but you're for having a senator that molests 12 and 13-year-old girls when he was an attorney. Anyway, so if we have the general United States, the overwhelming majority, wanting to have some legal basis for abortion, it seems to me that if it's left up to the states, Roe versus Wade is not going to completely erode. Now, but it's going to come back to be something that falls in line with what that 80% want, right?
Not necessarily, because 80% wanted Hillary, and the Electoral College said we got Trump. See, we got to think about the way that voter suppression also rests in the middle of this. All of this is intentional.
So is that also part of your agenda then, to try to make sure that people are counted appropriately?
Absolutely. We register people to vote. We do phone banking. We're out knocking on doors and canvassing and educating folks about what's happening on the Hill. Right. We do a Black Folks Day on the Hill every in the February or March of every year, where we're taking folks to the polls as Black folks, a delegation of people who are Black to the to the Hill, to talk to legislators about the things that impact Black folks specifically. And I don't want to make this like a Black only issue, but I do want to say
if that's what you do, that's what you do. We understand.
Well, we work on. I wish that we had the luxury of just serving Black folks here, but because we're really the only reproductive justice, it's 2 organizations that are RJs. The other one is also in Memphis, and that sisters group grew out of our groups called Birth Strides, run by Terry Lee Johnson, and she's doing maternal health for Black mamas and teens. But I think that but what isn't necessarily happening is Black folks being on the Hill. When I first started Sister Reach, I did a needs assessment before I even wrote out a program, like what is it that we need? And what I heard was overwhelmingly is that we needed to be on the Hill talking on our own behalf.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, I appreciate the work that Planned Parenthood has done thus far, but what does it look like to bring real people with real stories, like my own story, to the Hill to talk to
But they need
legislators.
help. But they need help. Planned Parenthood has been the whipping boy of this whole cause, to the point now
They've been
where
the force field. I think folks really realize,
even no matter how great they are, and there's some great folks over there, but the organization as a whole has been compromised. So it's going to happen after so many years of being beat up. So your organization coming in to be that juggernaut is very important at this time.
I wanted to roll back just a second, because you said something in our last segment that really interested me. Namely, it sounds like your organization is focused on, at least in part, trying to change the narrative around reproductive rights, you know, and again, we usually hear it in terms of this versus that, anti-abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, whatever, right? But by adding the context of all of the rights, you know, by adding in, voter rights, making sure people have the right to vote, or that they're not economically oppressed or whatever, are you? That obviously is intentional, but are you seeing it kind of starting to take root and is changing that narrative, helping to kind of change the culture in a way that can help support these rights? Yeah.
Over these last almost 8 years, we went from never hearing the phrase reproductive justice to having, candidates running for office using reproductive justice here in the state of Tennessee, here in Memphis, Tennessee, like Tammy Sawyer. Tammy Sawyer absolutely has been, centering reproductive justice as a part of her own platform, understanding that it's not just about abortion. It does include abortion. And the Black women who started this framework wanted to make sure, especially because Black women were dying at such an alarming rate, that abortion was a part of it. But if the human rights pieces, all those other issues, does she have health care? Can she choose whether or not she wants to be sterilized? Can she choose whether or not she wants to have in vitro fertilization? Even if she's on public aid, a midwife, a doula, things that currently we don't have access to unless you have loot. If you got the money, you can pay for those things. If you don't have health care, which we don't, you can't. Not only in many, you might not even be able to be seen by a doctor. So they were working for all of this. So reproductive justice umbrellas it all, and make sure that at the baseline, folks can make the best decisions for themselves, their families, and their communities without interference of the government or an individual. And that part is, paramount to making sure that we preserve, because everybody should be allowed to make those decisions as American folks, just in the world. We don't have to just be Americans. This is the human rights. These are human rights.
It's part of what you talked about. Human rights have to be in kilter. They have to be.
Yeah. It's way, way, way too funky, way too much show, but not enough time. Miss Cherisse Scott,
we gotta have her back. That's what that means.
But wait.
We gotta have you back.
But wait, you've got to tell our listeners how they can get more information about the wonderful work you do at Sister Reach. How do they contact you, maintain a relationship, get active, or whatever the case may be?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, we are on the World Wide Web. You can go to sisterreach.org. That's sisterreach.org. We are a nonprofit 501c3 with tax-deductible opportunities for you to invest in our work. You can also reach us through Facebook. We got a Facebook page. You can donate right through there. It's going to still come to us. We love to have folks volunteer. We have interns. We got, folks on staff working with folks in the community. Of course, all of this has made folks reach out to us in droves about ways that they can support. But we're definitely trying to make sure that we have a visible presence in the city of Memphis, across the state of Tennessee, on the national stage, so that folks know what's happening here in Tennessee, and also support the leadership of Black women doing this work on behalf of ourselves, our families, and the greater community, even if they are not Black. But vulnerable people, period, is who we're on behalf of. I wish we had the luxury of just working on behalf of ourselves, but we just don't. And so we're working on behalf of everybody else. And so you can go there, you can donate, you can mail information to us, mail a check, however you want to get it to us, snail mail.
Right.
We're located in Hickory Hill. We also work out of the Family Safety Center doing free HIV testing there as well, down in Midtown. And we're trying to be everywhere. We're all over the place. And so you can reach us sisterreach.org.
What's the address in Hickory Hill?
2725 Kirby Road, Suite 15, Memphis, Tennessee, 38119.
Her name is Cherisse Scott. She's the founder of Sister Reach Incorporated. And at some point, we will get you back, because that was very funky. Listener, don't go away. We'll be right back on Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network.
Later, alligator.
Funky Politics on the Kudzukian Network.
3.
Am I gonna sit there and argue with you over we had steak 2 days ago, I want chicken?
B.
I'm gonna be spicy all the time. I don't care if I'm single now.
C.
I think that the foundation is how you were brought up.
3 Black Chicks on the Kudzukian Network.
Keeping it real, right, and funky.
Is this an opportunity that we can seize and express interest from the governor and the state to act on behalf of young people in Shelby County? There are stories that we don't want to tell because they will piss some folks off, make some folk mad.
Funky Politics on the Kudzukian Network.
We're back on Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. And while the sun is vastly setting on our show, the knowledge is emanating and it continues to grow. I know you all have been thoroughly enlightened by what you have heard today from our wonderful guest, Ms. Cherisse Scott. I can't think of anybody that's more passionate about this issue of reproductive justice and has such a more compelling story other than her. Definitely a rising star.
Man, I'm still trying to scrape my brain off the wall when she said...
Scrape your brain?
Yes.
That's nasty, man.
It's funky. When she said... Hold up. This woman said...
Yeah.
Pro-birth, anti-choice supremacist.
Yes.
What? I know exactly what she means. It's all,
Get your hands
if
off
we say
my
it
uterus.
If we say it enough, maybe it'll get into the lexicon and we can change this conversation about these issues.
Wait. What did you say? What did you say?
Anti-choice supremacist.
Uh-huh.
In other words,
Say
get your hands off my uterus.
Wow.
That's what she said. And she did say that.
They say my uterus is for me, not you.
It's my uterus.
There you go.
Anyway, we do want to thank Cherisse Scott for joining us in studio today. What an awesome show it was.
But the other thing we need to know, though, and I don't want to let this go, is that in spite of the issues that are happening in Alabama, we really need to be more vigilant about our vote. 80% of Americans prefer to have some legislation affecting abortions that is not a ban. Then there's no reason for us to look at this situation happening in Alabama as any type of compromise of Roe versus Wade. It just does not make mathematical sense, doesn't make political sense, it doesn't make any kind of sense. But we have two situations that are under attack right now: our health care and women's reproductive health care. So we've got to get our souls to the polls, because women, the true worth of a race, Marcus Garvey, has to be measured by the character of its woman. And if our women are suppressed in any manner, what does that say about our character in this country?
And on that funky note,
there you go.
We want to thank you for listening. We want to thank Cherisse Scott for joining us in studio. Mm-hmm. And we want to invite you back for another episode of Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network,
where we always keep it real
Kudzukian Studios, directed, produced, and distributed by Kudzukian.